Hi, welcome to Finding Fuscata. I'm Sean. Today I'm going to tell you about how this simple $7 device completely changed my life. And if it seems hard to believe, if you stick around to the end, I might make a convert out of you. Before we get started, I want to say welcome back if you're a subscriber already. If you're new to the channel, definitely like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to see comments in there, and I'm definitely trying to grow this channel as much as possible to bring cool ideas like this to you guys, to bring some real value to the world. This little device is a simple lap counter. Maybe if you went to school in the 1980s, then you had a gym teacher who had one of these for, counting laps or counting push-ups, or maybe if you're like me, I worked in a warehouse for a while and I had one of these to count inventories because it's hard to keep track of stuff all over the place. What I developed, along with the help of my good friend and mentor, Whitney Riley, who I'll talk about more later in the video, is a 3-step process that you can use to change your negative self-talk to positive self-talk and build yourself up and completely change the trajectory of your life. In this video, I'm not going to talk about the history and the background of how this works. I just want to talk about the process itself. So the first thing that you'll want to do, get yourself one of these counters. And I recommend actually getting one of these. You can use a counter on your phone, or you can use a notebook, or something like that is fine. Some way that you can tally stuff. But there's something about pushing that button and watching the numbers go up throughout the day that seems to really help. So the process takes 3 weeks. And what you'll do is during the first week, you will count how much negative self-talk you have each day. So for example, on the first day, in my case, I counted 423 negative self-thoughts throughout that first day. And so it was things like, you've got that space between your teeth, looks weird, your nose is too big, your skin isn't quite how you want it to be, you don't make as much money as you'd like to, you don't make as much, you don't have the degree that you thought you would by now, your mom hasn't called you in a while, maybe she doesn't love you anymore. Like those, you have your own thoughts, and these are some of my thoughts, but each time you have one of those thoughts, just count it throughout the day. And like I said, for me, in the first day, I had 423. Well, the next day, I had 100 and something. And the next day it was fewer than that. And the next day it was fewer than that. By the time I got to day 7, I just had 1 or 2 negative thoughts. Well, the trick is, the following week, what you'll do is you'll go and reset this counter. And then you'll start going in the other direction. What I mean is, you'll start counting your positive thoughts. So on day 1, you might say, yeah, you know what, you do have that space between your teeth, but so does David Letterman, and everybody loves him. Or you might say, you know what, yeah, you don't have the degree you thought you were going to have, but so there's a lot of people who don't have the degrees that they thought they were going to have, and they're perfectly successful. Or you might say, yeah, you don't make as much money as you thought you would, but you know what, you're actually doing really, really well. You're making more money than your father ever did, and you're reasonably successful. And things like that. Little by slowly, you start saying those positive things about yourself. But you do this over the course of a second week. And the idea is that by the time you get to the end of the second week, you'll want to have as many positive thoughts about yourself as you did on the first day of negative thoughts. So you want to have like a bowl curve, right? Where like the lowest number is in the middle, and then on either side, say if you started out with 423 like I did, you'll want to end with 423 positive thoughts. And this process worked really, really well for me for a long time. And I had used other processes to get rid of negative self-talk. For example, one was something that Joe Dispenza said in one of his lectures, where if he had a negative self-thought, or if somebody in the audience did, he recommended just saying stop out loud in the middle of the negative self-talk. So in other words, you start thinking about, my pants are last year's style and nobody's gonna think I'm cool anymore. You just say stop. and the thought will stop. But then as throughout your day, as those thoughts start coming back up, each time you stop, you say the word stop out loud. And I did that practice, and after a while, a lot of the negative thoughts stopped coming. But then I stopped the process, and pretty soon all the negative self-talk came back, and I have to go do the process again, and I have to do the process again. But it wasn't until I figured out that if I counted them and then replaced them with positive self-talk, that they went away much more permanently. Now remember, I said much more permanently. It wasn't completely permanent until I found the third part of the process, which is something that I learned from my friend and mentor, Whitney Bradley. The third part of the process takes a little more practice, it takes a little more courage, and it takes a little more awareness of emotional subtleties or subtle emotions within yourself. After working with Whitney and going through her MEE process, which she calls Make Everything Easier, and by the way, it literally does. Once I started doing that work with her, I started to notice that even though I had done this work to get rid of the negative self-talk, I would still get negative self-images that would pop up. And along with those negative self-images were negative self-emotions. So I saw that what I had done was I had eliminated the negative self-talk, but hadn't eliminated the images that would come up and the emotions that were associated with those. So it's one thing to be able to get rid of that and then shift it, and then you don't have the negative self-talk anymore. But if the emotions are still coming up, if the images are still coming up, then all you've really done is, made you feel a little bit better about yourself. But you haven't gone in to start dealing with the things that are down in there. So what I started to do after having realized this, going through Whitney's process, is two things. The next time I would have a session with her, I would bring these things up, and I would start to let them go, and I would start to face them, and I would start to tap on them, and I would work through her process to start release those things. And so I highly recommend, if you can, get in touch with her. I'll put a link in the show notes to her work, and you can get a copy of her book and start doing the work on your own, or maybe join one of her programs. She has lots of different options that I would highly recommend taking advantage of. If those things aren't in your budget or in your scope, or if you're not even sure how all that kind of stuff works, another great resource that I found, another part of the process that I have found helps me, is applying the letting go process as it was written by Dr. David Hawkins in his book called Letting Go. In Dr. Hawkins' book, he talks about the importance of letting go of these old emotions that you have. And it sounds like a simple thing, but it can be a little bit challenging. I found it difficult to do at first. But what I found, especially through reading Michael Singer's work, and also Parallel Universe of Self by Frederick Dodson, the idea is to think of a situation that you may have had. So I'll use myself for example. When I was first doing work on my limiting beliefs, I had a memory that came back of how I had been at a daycare center, and I was there with my older sister, and we went up onto a playground, like a jungle gym, and my parents had just split up. My mother had left, and I had a lot of complicated emotions. For a 2.5, 3-year-old child, this was a hard time to go through. And I remember climbing up onto a jungle gym, and it was time to go back inside, and I got too scared and I couldn't climb back down, and the teachers and the assistants were there, and they tried to get me down, and I was just frantic. I couldn't do it. And in my memory, what I had seen is that I wanted my mom to come and help me, or I wanted my dad to come and help me, but they weren't going to come. And in my memory also, I remember looking out towards the road and seeing my mother drive by. I just had a green Volkswagen Beetle back in the day. Seeing her drive by and imagining her coming back into the parking lot and coming and helping me down. But the woman that I saw driving the car, and I thought was my mother, just drove on by. And that got so discouraging for me. And this was part of a pattern of limiting beliefs that I had in my life, that the thing that I want is too scary for me, it's too hard for me to do. But it's also just out of reach. Like, I can't get down. I can see other people are doing it, other people are benefiting from being able to do it. But the thing that I want is just out of reach, and I'm powerless to do anything to change it. Now, what I was able to do, well, with that memory in particular, I was able to get in touch with my mother and shared it with her, and she said, that's not possible. She's like, she had left, but she wasn't even in the area, so that couldn't have happened. And, if she had known that we were in a daycare, then she would have gotten us. And anyway, we had a big conversation about it. But what I was able to do through using Frederick Dodson's work and through Dr. David Hawkins' work, and then eventually later using Whitney Riley's work, is I could take the emotion of that day, the emotion of that memory, whether it was true or not, that was like this overwhelming sadness and this overwhelming angst. And every time I thought about that and looked at it, I would feel that. But the trick was to be able to just sit with it, and just see it for what it was. So, and all it was just an event. It was just the thing that happened. And when I was able to look at it without sorrow, and when I was able to look at it without joy, I was just able to look at it matter-of-factly, then I was able to just release that emotion. And I was also able to feel those emotions and stop pushing them down. And once I stopped pushing them down, then, remember I said before that even though I had changed the language around myself, I hadn't changed the emotions. So the language that I had before was, your mother doesn't want anything to do with you because, look, she drove on by. But when I was able to take that memory and realize that she didn't drive on by, maybe I saw somebody else, maybe it was 2.5, I didn't know what was going on, I was able to then see that as an adult and say, oh, it's just a situation, and it's okay now, and it's not something that I'm experiencing right now anyway. And I could stop running from that emotion, and I could just feel that emotion and allow it to be there for a minute. And it lasted, 5 or 10 minutes, a couple minutes, maybe probably not even that long. And eventually it dissipated when I allowed myself to feel it. But what happened then is I noticed that even though previously I had changed the negative self-talk about things like that, your mom doesn't want anything to do with you, and I had changed it to, hey, your mom kind of does want something to do with you, that image would still be the thing that popped up, and the emotion would still be the thing that popped up. I changed the dialogue around it, but I hadn't changed the underlying emotion. Does that make sense? So it's one thing, you can do a lot of good in your life by taking the negative self-talk and turning it to positive self-talk, and that's great. Go ahead and do it. But it's going to keep coming back, and you won't see the major life change that you want until you find the emotion that caused those words and images to bubble up and deal with that underlying emotion. So think about it like this. The way that I find easier to contextualize these things, to see them as just an event, is this. And this is a perspective that I got from Dr. David Hawkins, where he talks about truth. In our times, we hear a lot of people talking about expressing your truth and finding your truth and living your truth. And that's great. And people should absolutely, live their life and find what's true about them, and live out the life, live out who they are, as long as they're doing it from a place of love and not from fear or anger. But we should be careful about the language that we use, because we say everybody can have their own truth, everybody can find their own truth, but that's not really true. It's not really possible. So try this analogy and see if this helps you understand it. Imagine that there's a birthday party for a little girl, and she's turning 5 years old, and they're in the room where she is. Imagine it's a living room, and the little girl's in the middle of the living room, and she's opening up her present, and it's a Barbie doll, and it's a white lady Barbie doll with blonde hair, and she's wearing a bikini, and the little girl's opening it, and she's really happy because she wanted a new Barbie doll. Well, in that room, there are mom and dad, and grandma and grandpa, and then another grandma and grandpa, and then some cousins, maybe a brother and sister, and then aunts and uncles, and some friends, and a dog. And everybody's looking at that event. Everybody's watching this little girl open up the present. And maybe the dad is looking at it and thinking, I should have gotten her a different one. She looks happy, but I wonder if I could have made her happier. And maybe the mom is looking at her open it and thinking, I love that. It's going to be so cool. She's going to have so much fun with that. We're going to play dolls together. It's going to be amazing. And maybe the grandfather is thinking, more Barbies? Like, these kids, they can't, they can't afford all these toys, but they buy her all these toys, and now they're going to come for me later on when they're short on money, but they just bought this Barbie. And maybe the grandma is thinking, well, back in my day, we didn't let the kids play with Barbies because it was like over-sexualizing women. You see? Everybody has their own perspective. And then the dog, like my dog loves tearing up, wrapping paper and presents. So the dog is just thinking, paper, paper, paper. I want to rip it up. Oh, something else to chew. Everybody has their own perspective on that. And from that sense, when everybody looks at it through their own paradigm, through their own eyes, they have their own truth. But nobody has the truth, because there still is a truth there. And the truth is that a little girl sat in a room and opened a present. And it was her birthday. So the truth is just a very objective thing. It's just a thing that happened. And when we look at it through our paradigms, and apply our own emotions to it, we apply our own worldviews to it, that's when it becomes an emotionally infused event. But we have the ability, through something we call a paradigm shift, to look at the other people's perspectives throughout the room and say, well, what did grandma think of that? What did grandpa think of that? What did the aunt and uncle think about that? And when you get all those around and you get all those perspectives in there, as I see it, you have two choices. You can either get really, really confused about what's the right perspective, who had the right perspective, who's right, who's wrong, who's better, who's worse, who's indifferent, I don't know. And you can make yourself crazy thinking about all that kind of stuff. Or you can just accept the simple truth that a little girl opened a present on her birthday, and that's it. So for me, going back to my memory about being stuck on the jungle gym and seeing my mother driving by, that was an emotionally charged moment for me. I was like 3 years old or so, and like my whole world was falling apart. I didn't know what was going on. But when I realized that interpretation, that event that started to change how I perceive the world, that changed into negative self-talk, that changed into limiting belief, that part wasn't me, strictly speaking. This is what it talks about in Michael Singer's book, that the voice that you hear, the thing that's going on all the time, isn't you. You are the part that's listening to it. I am the part that was allowing that interpretation of that event to set up my limiting beliefs, to set up the trajectory of my life. And what I was able to do by using the processes I talked about is to just see that as what it was. It was a little boy who was stuck on a jungle gym, and he was afraid to get down. And he thought he saw his mom. And that's all it was. And once I'm able to do that, then all the emotional charge that's behind that just kind of just dissipates. I don't want to give you any misconceptions that once you go through this 3-step process, your dream significant person is going to come knock on your door, or that you're magically going to have a huge lottery win that's going to show up, or that one job that you really, really want is just somebody's just going to come and say, please, please come work for us. That's not how any of this works, and I'm not making any of those promises or guarantees. It could happen because it has happened, but I don't know. I don't know what you've got to work through. I don't know what you've got to work with. But what I can say with absolute certainty, because this is what happened to me, and this is what happened to a lot of other people that I've worked with and that I've seen make these changes, is when you start to change the negative self-talk, even if you don't go through the whole thing of replacing the emotions that are underneath it, even just changing the negative self-talk, you will start to see the world differently. Remember what Dr. Dyer used to say: when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's what this is all about. If you can change your perception of things and even make them into something positive, or if you go the extra step and you work with, and you choose to work with Whitney Riley, or you do the tapping process, or if you go and read Parallel Universes of Self or something else by Frederick Dodson, or if you read some books by Dr. David Hawkins, you can take these different processes and use them and go deeper and deeper and deeper. And those are great. But what I can tell you for sure is that once you start doing this work, if you take that first week, even if you don't do the second week, just take that first week and get your counter and start tracking the negative self-talk that you have, you'll notice that after a few days, there's not that much of it. So even if you don't take the second and third steps, going through that first week, going through one day, going through 1 hour of doing this brings awareness to the negative self-talk. And if nothing else, it brings relief. It brings relief from the constant negative self-talk that's there. So I'll leave it up to you. I'll leave information in the show notes so that you can find links to these resources. And I highly encourage you to try this out because it works. It works for me. I've seen it work for a lot of people. And I'm pretty sure it'll work for you. So I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a great week. I hope you have a great week upcoming. And definitely let me know what you think of this in the comments. Try it out. Let me know what happens if you have different perspectives. If you have an idea that works even better for you, let me know in the description and we can have a great conversation about it. If you'd like to learn more about this kind of stuff, if you'd like to have more conversations about this, please do consider going over to school.com. That's SKOOL.com. /Finding Fuscata, just like it's spelled on the channel here. And we have some great conversations over there. There's a growing group of people who are just honestly seeking after truth and honestly, digging deep to improve their lives and talking about all this kind of stuff that we do on the channel. So if you're interested in that, go check us out over there. And in the meantime, see me soon.